All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
So in 3, 2.
Good afternoon. I now call to order the meeting of the Curriculum and Instruction Committee for Thursday, November the 18th, 2021. In accordance with the mandated direction of the State Superintendent, Baltimore County Public Schools and offices are closed to the public and non-essential personnel in order to maintain the health and safety of our students and staff. In accordance with the Board of Education's resolution approved at the March 10th, 2020 board meeting, in the event of a medical or health emergency related to COVID-19, the board chair, in consultation with the vice chair and the superintendent, may declare that a board meeting or board committee meeting be held remotely in its entirety without the physical presence of board members, subject to the establishment of a mechanism that would allow each board member the opportunity to fully participate in the meeting despite not being physically present, and that would allow the public to also remotely attend those portions of the meeting that are open pursuant to the Maryland Open Meetings Act by being able to listen and or view those portions of the meeting. As a result, today's Curriculum and Instruction Committee meeting is being held virtually and broadcasted through live stream on BCPS website or BCPS-TV. In order to efficiently conduct this meeting, all voting items this afternoon will be done by a roll call vote. Board members will say their names before making and seconding a motion as applicable, as well as when requesting discussion on an agenda item. Ms. Cox, please call the roll to determine the presence of a quorum of the committee.
Ms. Pasteur?
Present.
Mr. Offerman? I don't think I see him.
No.
Dr. Hager?
Present.
Ms. Mack?
Present.
Mr. Thomas?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. Will you call the names of all committee staff members?
Dr. McComas?
Present.
Dr. Emmendorf?
Present.
Dr. Holmes? Dr. Parendozzi?
Present.
Ms. Shea?
Present.
Dr. Wisted?
Present.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Cox. Will you call the roll of any staff members not previously called who will be participating in today's meeting?
Ms. Fisher?
Present.
And we have Mr. Gibbs as invited guest.
And again, Mr. Gibbs, welcome. Are there any board members present that I've not seen or we've not heard from, Ms. Cox?
I don't see anyone on.
All right, then I thank you. And I welcome everyone to today's meeting. Ms. Cox, if there's anything that I'm missing, which will be a lot because I couldn't get into my mail. Okay. So in that case, if there's anything I'm missing, anyone, Dr. McComas, Ms. Shea, Mr. Thomas, any other committee member, stop me in the name of love. All right, with that being said, yes, Dr. McComas, you just want to show me the love?
No, I was demonstrating the stop in the name of love.
You're just showing me the love. Thank you, Dr. McComas. And Mr. Thomas, I'm assuming that hand up was for love. Thank you. All right, that being said, Dr. McComas, I'm going to turn it over to you so we may get started.
Yes, ma'am. So good afternoon, members of the committee. We appreciate your time today. We have 2 items today that we will be going through on our agenda. Both of them really are information items for you. So our first one will be a courtesy update on our math curriculum audit contract that you will see coming forward in a future contracts committee. And we're really providing you an update on where we are and why you'll see that coming forward. But that's already, been approved years ago. And we're just really, again, I always try to provide you the courtesy so that you know what's coming forward and you had time to know and understand what is coming down the road. And then our second item of business today is we're bringing forward, Ms. Shea and Ms. Fisher are bringing forward a presentation related to culturally responsive curriculum, and how do we work to ensure that our curriculum is culturally responsive, and what are the resources that we use to help us in that process. And so they'll be sharing that with you today as part of our curriculum work. So with no further ado, I'll turn it over to Ms. Shea, who will give us our update related to the math audit.
Excellent. Ms. Cox, are you or Mr. Corns showing the presentation, or should I pull it up? Oh, there it is. Perfect. So thank you for that. Perfect timing. So good afternoon, Chair Pasteur and members of the board, and Dr. McComas. Thank you for having us today. As Dr. McComas shared, we wanted to give you an update on the math curriculum audit. Next slide, please. You will remember, for those of you who were on the board, and then certainly for our new members joining, I want to give a little bit of background. The original contract that you see reflected there that Dr. McComas referenced was the contract to initiate that review, the full program review. And we referenced the curriculum audit, but curriculum was just the first piece of the review. It was actually 4 items. So item 1 was actually looking at the current BCPS curriculum, identifying areas of need, and making recommendations. That item was done actually by the New Teacher Project as an outsource from Johns Hopkins, and actually served as the impetus for us to get the new curriculum resources that this board has been so incredibly supportive of. So we used the review of our internal curriculum to help us identify the needs and help us to select those high quality evidence-based resources that we currently have in K-5 in the Bridges curriculum, and that we're now in the process of rolling out in secondary through the illustrative math program. We also were able to complete item 2, which really reflected the pacing and sequencing of our math curriculum and gave us recommendations related to how our students performed in different course sequences, as well as whether or not the pacing of the curriculum was reasonable for teachers in terms of the number of days that we had accounted for different topics as it relates to the rigor of the core. Because item 1 and item 2 identified areas of need, which again precipitated us changing the curriculum, we actually pressed pause on items 3 and 4. Item 3 was really designed to look at implementation, and I know that's an area that in particular this committee and the full board are always very passionate about. How do we know if it's working? How do we know if our teachers are actually implementing it with fidelity? And how do we know that that's yielding the outcomes intended by the evidence base that we use to select the curriculum? Because the original review of our BCPS curriculum indicated that we needed to make a change, we paused on item 3 and item 4 back in 2019, because of course we didn't want to examine fidelity of implementation of a curriculum that we would be replacing. Instead, we wanted to pause, do the work to replace that curriculum, which in this case is Bridges and illustrative math, and then resume item 3 and 4 so that we can see about fidelity of implementation with this brand new curricular resource. It was then further paused last year because the item 3 and 4 really require us to be in schools and in classrooms. Because of the emergency closure, we did not do item 3 and item 4 last year. And so the contract modification that will be coming to the board, as Dr. McComas referenced, is simply an extension. This contract was due to expire in June of 2022. And what we're asking for is an extension of 1 year so that we can begin this work. And we're not waiting till next year. We're actually going to start visiting classrooms. We've been working and re-engaging with the team from Johns Hopkins to design items 3 and 4. Which schools are we going to start visiting? How are we going to look for implementation? But the exciting news is we're going to be actually looking at implementation of those new curriculum resources. So rather than looking at the old curriculum, we're actually going to have an opportunity to leverage this program review to see about fidelity of implementation of our new curriculum. So I'm sure you can hear that I'm really excited about this because this is often the most challenging piece whenever we roll out a curriculum. So the fact that I get these experts to help us do it is really exciting. exciting. And so what will be coming, in order for us to be able to do that well, we want to have the time throughout this year to visit multiple schools and multiple classrooms. We're going to be able to look at both Bridges and the illustrative math curriculum that we're using in our secondary schools. And then we need the time next year for looking at the recommendations for professional learning and for all of that reporting that would be necessary once we work with Hopkins. And so this is just us letting you know where we are in that sequence and coming back to it, but also giving you that heads up that we are asking for that extension just to give us the extra time to finish that work that was paused for the reasons I mentioned. Next slide. I think there's one more. Oh, nope, just
highlighting.
Mr. Corns loves when I animate my slides, so I apologize, Mr. Corns. So this is just capturing again those dates, that it's the upcoming building and contracts on December 7th. Well, we'll talk about that. The contract actually comes up through the Division of Research, Assessment, and Accountability. I'm just a partner in the work, but because we have spent so much time with the curriculum committee talking about our why and what we've been learning. And I do want to also note there is no additional funds. So we're not adding any funds to the contract request. We are simply extending the time. It is already built into the nature of that contract. And so we just want to make sure that we have the time to do it well. And that's what's coming up. So I'll pause there for any feedback or questions on that topic.
Thank you, Ms. Shea. That was excellent. And the reasons for pausing, thank you, very necessary. And I'm absolutely certain if you hadn't said those things, Ms. Mack would have asked those questions as well as Dr. Hager's questions. So thank you, Dr. Hager, for putting your question out there, because that is an important one in terms of cost. So I'm going to just open it to the members for any questions that they might have. But I do want to thank you for that forward thinking, understanding that putting something on pause and seeing a deadline in front of us really does not mean in terms of the growth and the needs of our students that we really just continue on without addressing what we were looking for in the first place. So thank you for bringing that up. So I'm going to start with you, Dr. Hager, if you don't mind, since you put a question out there. I'm sure there's something else that you would like to share.
I actually don't have any other questions. I thought it was explained very well and makes perfect sense to me. So
all right, thank you, Dr. Hager. Ms. Mack?
Yes, thank you. Ms. Shea, were any of our recent acceleration or remediation purchases specific to math?
So we did purchase First in Math. We were able to last year when we shifted as part of the virtual learning. That was a purchase that we made related to math.
Okay, and so my question is, for anything like that, are we limiting this review, steps 3 and 4, to just illustrative math and Bridges, or are we going to be looking at First in Math and anything else like that?
That's a great question. Oh, go ahead, Dr. McComas, I'm sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's a great question. So go ahead.
We are focusing on the core curricular resources. So the curriculum review will be about the core curriculum resources of Bridges and then illustrative math. And that's what we will focus on in the classroom visits. However, we are also part of the review includes focus groups with teachers and with administrators. And so in that sense, there will be more of an open-ended around needs, in which case I anticipate some of those supplemental resources may absolutely come up.
And will you also be looking to see, we always talk about implementing things with fidelity. Will you also be looking to see if teachers are augmenting anything, either the illustrative math or Bridges, with perhaps things that they think work, but aren't necessarily the things that you would want to see used in a classroom?
Yes, thank you for that. Dr. McComas, did you want to answer?
Right, I was just going to say, and certainly, Ms. Shea, you'll elaborate. That's exactly what our intent here is, right? And that's part of why it made sense for us to pause and not look at fidelity of implementation of a curriculum, the old curriculum, right? Because the first phase of it, said you really need to change your curriculum, right? So we changed it. We've been working through trying to train people, get people familiar with the resources and materials and move to implementation. So this is really does hone in on exactly what you're asking. And so, Ms. Shea, you can certainly elaborate more if you.
Yes, so it is a great question, and it's a really important conversation because it's what teachers are asking too. So one of the things that we've been engaged with in partnership with staff from DRAA and also with these experts from Johns Hopkins is how do we define fidelity? And that's a really important question because, and teachers are asking it. So Ms. Mack, when you talk about, I had a teacher yesterday say, so am I allowed to still use manipulatives even if the Bridges curriculum doesn't specifically say, you know, use these counting cubes? And that's pedagogy. That's teachers knowing their children and would certainly not detract from fidelity, but teachers are trying to do what we're asking of them and they're trying to understand the difference. So the very first step of this work for this next part of fidelity implementation is having a clear definition of what do we mean by fidelity. And so that's the work we've been engaging with. Our math director has been working with her math leadership team to identify those components of both Bridges and then illustrative math that are what we consider those non-negotiables so that we can have clarity for teachers around what's the difference. How do we make sure, because to your point, teachers do have a lot of feelings about things that they feel really passionate about, and we need to make sure that we preserve the evidence base that the law requires us to use when selecting curricular materials, while also empowering our teachers to be teachers and to be those instructional decision makers. So the very first step of this work is how are we defining fidelity and developing that tool so when the teams of researchers go into these classrooms, they're using that baseline expectation of that definition of fidelity for giving us that feedback.
Thank you very much.
I'm excited about it.
Yeah, we look forward, you know, we want to be able to come forward and say, look, we implemented this change, we did it with fidelity, and here's the results and the outcomes because we're in it to change it for the better for kids. And we know that that's what you're in it all for as well. And that's the questions you ask are clear. And we look forward to being able to bring back to the table and say, here's where we are. Here's either the improvements we've made, and here's the distance we still need to improve on. So,
thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Ms. Mack. Mr. Thomas.
Sure. Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Shea and Dr. McComas. On a lot of my school visits recently, I can't stress enough how many of our teachers and administrators are talking about Bridges and talking about the illustrative math and saying that it is amazing. They're thanking the executive directors for helping them with everything. They're thanking the board, me as a board member. I don't know much about Bridges or illustrative math. Yes, and they're saying so many incredible things about this so far. So I'm excited for you to get to go out to the schools and see the work that how it's being implemented in our schools. My one question is, where can I learn more about Bridges and about illustrative math?
We will schedule time with you to help. So that's easy peasy. We will get that scheduled some time.
Yeah, and we love talking about it. So
yes,
I'm happy to do that. That would be great.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. And keep doing such great work.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your points, but more so for asking how you can be a part of that. And I see that Ms. Mack would like to be a part. And why don't we just jump to the quick here? Why don't we just make sure all of us have your thinking about all of that? I think that would be great for this committee to do that. So thank you, Mr. Thomas, for asking, because I think it's something that can serve all of us. I'm glad Ms. Mack asked the question about fidelity, because we have a lot of words, don't we, that we throw out there a lot. They sound good, and then we just keep saying them over and over, and then they have no meaning. So that is wonderful, and the answer was wonderful in that we are looking at our students. So when you go out and you're looking, it's not just what we prescribed, what we have in the curriculum, but seeing what our teachers know as well. And certainly we've all been asking the question of where are our children now? Mm-hmm. And so putting it on pause, it was just the right thing to do, because there's no sense looking for something that's not there and can't be there because we haven't been there. Right. So this is a good opportunity to really get a sense of where not only our children are, but where our teachers are, et cetera, and how we continue to move them. So thank you, and thank you for that question. Ms. Mack, and the answer about fidelity and just what that means. So great. We're excited too and looking forward to that and appreciate it and appreciate you.
Thank you.
Well, Ms. Shea, as you know, a tremendous instructional leader, and she and the math team have worked hard. And I just would like to just say one last thing before we move on to our next agenda item. I just want to thank our board members so much for approving the contract in the first place, because I know in the beginning there was concern about spending the money to contract out for this audit review, but it allowed us to move with some urgency and to begin really addressing a deep need that we have. And as you can see, you've been with us every step of the journey, right? It takes time. It takes time to identify the appropriate resources. It takes time to bring that through the purchasing and acquisition process. It takes time to get that to schools and provide the professional development for our teachers. And then again, time to come back and implement. And we were able to continue to make progress despite the challenges of the last 18 months. So we would never be in the position we are today, which I'm really excited and proud of the work that we've done, had we not had your board support and your willingness to recognize the urgency to not wait for perhaps the state to help us with it. And as I'll just put a little plug in, as you know, we are currently working with MSDE to audit our ELA curriculum. And so I think this math journey has been a worthwhile one for our children and our teachers and for us as leaders of the school system. And I just want to thank you, because you took a chance at a time that you weren't sure it was the time to do it, but you did it, and we are better off today for your leadership in that. So thank you, and look forward to the journey with ELA that will be coming up in the next 12 months as well. So on that, I will.
Right, thank you.
You're welcome. I will move us on to our next part of our business today. So as you know, we are constantly analyzing and looking at our curriculum, make sure that our curriculum is appropriate, because again, in the spirit of the math audit, we look at our results and we are not satisfied with the results that we have. And so we recognize that we need to continue to analyze and improve to do a better job serving our students. And so with that, under Ms. Shea's leadership, the teams have really been looking at culturally responsive curriculum and how do we ensure that our students see themselves in our curriculum, that they are represented, and that the curriculum is relevant to them and their lives and the generation that they that they bring to us. So I'll turn it over to Ms. Shea to take it away, and Ms. Fisher will really bring a lot of dimensionality to this context today as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McComas, for that lead-in. And thank you, Mr. Corns. I don't think there's animation on this one, but I will pay you $5 if there is. So we can go to the next slide. So I wanted to start, as Dr. McComas said, my goal is really to provide updates on our progress. And I think about what Ms. Pastor just said a moment ago, that sometimes we use a lot of buzzwords, and it's important that we really mean what we say. And so today I really want to unpack, you've heard me talk in several different presentations about the impetus to be more culturally responsive. And so I'm grateful to Dr. McComas for giving us the opportunity to really talk about what does that look like in our internal work, and what does that actually mean? And where are we right now? What have we done to date? And some of the things I'll reference you're familiar with because you've helped approve them. But I also today wanted to share a spotlight on visual arts, because sometimes we tend to focus on things like ELA. It's really obvious we have to change the books we're reading. But this effort and the impact it has on students is far-reaching. It's across all of our disciplines. And so I'm really excited to share today what I hope maybe could be a series of opportunities. I'll put in a little plug because we have 13 different content areas and we're all working on this. And so we would love the chance to come back even again and show it in science and dance and all the other areas as well. But for today, I want to start at the next slide with really talking about what do we mean by culturally responsive curriculum. And so I wanted to reference part of the definition from our policy. We use board policy to really help ground our work and ground our efforts and to make sure that we have that consistency of implementation. And there's some language in this definition of culturally responsiveness as outlined in Policy 0100 that really is the underpinnings of our work. And it begins with this idea of an asset-based knowledge. And so we want our students to know that student achievement in our district is not in spite of differences, but because of them, that we're able to actually view the differences that our students bring, whether they are racial or ethnic, cultural differences, experiences, and multiple perspectives, and view them as the asset-based knowledge fund that we can then build on and incorporate into teaching and learning. But the important part is that last part of the phrase. I know as a board, as well you should be, you're very interested in student achievement. And I hope today I'm able to illustrate that culturally responsiveness is a method of improving student achievement. It has to be if we're going to support the students that we have. Next slide, please. And so within that policy language, there are very specific, there's a long list of alphabetical directives that really talk about what we're striving to do so that we're not only increasing educational equity, but also ensuring access to rigorous educational opportunities that will have the impact of closing that achievement gap. Again, trying to show this Venn diagram that when you hear us talk about our efforts to ensure our curriculum is more culturally responsive, it's because we want to raise achievement and close gaps for students. And so I picked out two. There's actually many that speak to this, but the first one really calls on us to include cultural responsiveness in our reviews of curriculum and our design of assessments. And so oftentimes when we come here, I'm asking you to approve something and I'll reference policy and rule 6002 of the steps that we went through to actually make sure that we're evaluating those resources. And it's really important that we're evaluating them with this lens. And what I will offer, and we've talked about this as a committee, is a lot of programs and products out there will have a seal on them that says they're culturally responsive. But when we actually dig in and start unpacking and looking at the perspectives, who's centered, what populations are dominant in the resources, or what contexts are utilized, it's really important that we center that in our review. And then the second one is that we are charged in Policy 0100 to provide materials and assessments that reflect the diversity of our students, but that are also geared towards helping to understand and appreciate culture. So it's equally as important that all of our students see themselves in the curriculum and that they also see their peers. And so it's important that we're balancing the representation so that every student sees themselves in those different pathways. And it's equally important that we're helping our students understand and appreciate those differences that contribute to the beauty that Dr. McComas referenced was evident on the screen, even in our student town hall. So this is really about our why. Why we're doing this is because certainly grounded in policy and rule, but also grounded in our efforts to ensure that equitable access and achievement for all of our students. And I also want to quickly reference a year ago this past summer when we had a broader student town hall, because one of my whys is that our students demanded. Our students were really clear in their feedback that this was an area that we were not hitting the mark yet, that some of our students very passionately spoke about, I went through my whole high school and never once, you can fill in the blank, had an opportunity to learn this. And so that was really a wake-up call, I think, for all of us, and really is another part of our why. So while it's certainly grounded in policy and rule, it's also important that I share that it's grounded in our students. They told me that this is what they needed. And so today I'm here to share what we're doing to try to meet that expectation. So next slide. And so this is data that I know as board members you're very familiar with, but it's also a part of our why. This is, now this, of course, data is always changing. This was a snapshot that was taken from a presentation DRA had done this summer to show who we are in our student population. And so when you look at this beautiful pie chart, you can see that this notion that we have a beautiful diversity of students that we're serving that should see themselves represented and should have the opportunity to learn about and understand differences becomes more and more important as a system. Next slide, please. And then last but certainly not least, our compass, our pathway to excellence, is where as a system we have set forth our goal for equity in action and our commitment to ensuring that our students have equitable access to that rigorous, high quality and highly effective instruction. And that our data tells us that we have to interrupt and examine our current practices. We know that some of that is about increasing the evidence base, as we talked about with our math and our ELA resource, but also in our compass, we talk about our commitment to focus on culturally responsive and relevant teaching and learning. Some of that work comes with increasing the diversity of our curriculum writer workforce, but also it's about ensuring that the curriculum itself is reflective of this asset-based approach. And that's certainly spelled out in the teaching and learning framework as well. Next slide, please. And so on this slide, I'm just capturing, as I mentioned, oftentimes when we think about culturally responsive curriculum, we think about books. And of course, you all know by now I'm a big fan of books. And you will remember these are books that you have helped us approve. So on the right-hand side, these are the new novels. So since that time in the last year, these are all the novels that we have added to the curriculum to ensure that representation. We have centered students of color as heroes, not as sidekicks. We have centered students from different perspectives, Asian American, Pacific Islanders, not celebrating or centering a struggle or strife, but celebrating them as superheroes in some instances. We have also identified students who identify as part of the LGBTQ+ community, centering them as characters in novels. That is important, and yet, even though I'm so proud of the vast number of books on this screen, we need more because we have to make sure that we avoid the danger of a single story. I can't just read one story that centers that experience because then I'm expressing to students that that's the experience. And I have to make sure that students see that from a plurality. On the left-hand side, this is from our social studies team. So some of these are elementary picture books that have been added as part of, you're very familiar, I'm sure, with our Black Saga program. It has evolved into our Celebrating Black Excellence program, where we also have an opportunity for a much wider range of students. We still have that piece of students learning those facts and having an opportunity to participate, but we've broadened the scope of that so that our students have an opportunity to celebrate Black excellence, whether it's through different inventors or political activists or different things that are even local to our Baltimore community. But for today, so this is just kind of a recap of things you're already familiar with that we've brought through more of a traditional approval process. Today, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about how we kind of got from there to here. And then we're going to shine that spotlight on visual arts. Next slide, please. So as an academics team, I remember I mentioned already that it was really impactful for me hearing from our students at that town hall a year ago last summer, and thinking about what can we do to really take stock of where we are in our curriculum to make sure that we have consistency of understanding of what do we even mean when we talk about cultural responsiveness, and how can we audit ourselves and take a look at what's available and make sure that we are supporting this mission. And so we utilized a resource published by NYU titled the Culturally Responsive Curriculum Scorecard. And the intent of this tool, it's actually was originated for parents and community members to do their own audit of their child or their student's curriculum to make sure that we're doing our job and ensuring they have access to that. But then it's also available for school districts and curriculum teams to be reflective of the curriculum to ensure that they're moving towards being more culturally responsive. Next slide. The scorecard has 3 different areas, and I'm going to talk a little bit about each of the area, and then I'm going to talk about sort of the charge that I gave my academics team under Dr. McComas's leadership. The first area of the tool talks about representation. So this is when we're asking teams to actually look at who's being centered. We ask them to look at it from the characters in fictional text as well as in non-fictional text. We also ask them to think about it from the lens of authors, which authors are being centered and whose perspectives are being told. We also had an opportunity in the tool to talk about the teacher materials. How are the teacher materials providing teachers with that support to think about centering different narratives and having those multiple perspectives while also maintaining that asset-based approach. The third area of the rubric talks about what they've dubbed as social justice orientation, but I want to unpack that a little bit because I know that can take on a lot of different forms. It really talks about that curriculum must highlight the strengths and assets of non-dominant populations so that all students can see themselves reflected, but that they can also develop that appreciation for what we talk about as a global community. When we think about preparing our students to be globally competitive, it has to start with an understanding of the diversity of that globe and how we can focus on that from an asset-based perspective, representing people of diverse races, classes, genders, abilities, and sexual orientation by highlighting their strengths, talents, and knowledge. It also talks about making sure that curriculum and instruction promotes critical questions to make sure that our students are able to develop the skills that they need to challenge some of those dominant narratives and make sure that they have that lens of multiple perspectives. And by providing students avenues within the curriculum for how they can connect with their learning to their current experience. So we talk about things like students having an opportunity to research a local problem, to develop advocacy, to think about writing a letter to a congressperson, or perhaps changing something even within their school community. And then we also talk together about how each of these areas of the rubric can be looked at in isolation. So you can take just one piece of the rubric and focus on that, or looking at a curriculum through the totality. And so in my charge to my academics team, which started about 18 months ago or so, was for us to take on this work, for us to develop consistency across all of our disciplines, that this is our charge, that these are the students that we're serving. Our students have been really clear about what we were doing and not doing and what they demanded and expected of us to ensure that they had access to this. We also are real clear about our compass commitments for raising student achievement. So as a team, we used this tool to begin having those really earnest conversations, those reflective conversations with teachers, with curriculum writers, and with administrators. And then my charge to each of my teams was to take either one part of this tool. And so as I mentioned, ELA focused pretty heavily on representation. They started there with looking at the novels and the books that they've centered. Our social studies team focused more on that social justice orientation and where are the opportunities for students to engage in that civic action that we know is so critical for developing historic literacy perspectives. And so what I'm going to do next that I'm very excited about, you can go to the next slide, is I'm going to invite Sherry Fisher to talk about her charge, because when this tool was first developed, it is very much a literacy-based tool. So even as I was mentioning, talking about things like characters, it is very much a literacy-based tool. But my expectation for the team was, even if we don't have a tool that's unique to our area, how can we think about this tool through the lens of our content? Because that's our role. As part of curriculum and instruction, we serve as those advocates for our content areas, but also as those ambassadors for our teachers about how they can live out that equity work that is so critical to our district and do it while keeping an eye on those standards and those unique aspects of our discipline. And so with that, I'm going to introduce Sherry Fisher. Sherry Fisher, at the time we started this work, was our coordinator of visual arts. She today, I'm happy to say, is serving as our director of CTE and fine arts. And so she's able to take what she started with our visual arts team and really expand it, and we'll hopefully be able to talk a little bit about how she weaves that in. So with that, Sherry's going to share with us how she took that same charge and how she worked with her visual arts curriculum and her teachers and the impact we're starting to see with our students as a result. So Sherry, turn it over to you.
Thank you. So we can go to the next slide. So when we started this work in visual arts and in the role, what we really looked at first was we started with a reflection on what we had been seeing and hearing from our teachers and in the work of our students. And we really focused in on this idea of representation and what does representation mean in a visual arts classroom, everything. And we really looked at it in terms of the artists that are shown, the types of artwork that are explored, the types of artistic artistic processes, as well as the kind of what goes into sort of not just looking at an individual image, but understanding the context around an image or a series of images. And so we started with this idea of to look at this, and we were really looking at this sort of to disrupt this disconnect that we were seeing between curriculum and instruction. So, you know, we might have an example, a resource for teachers that has a lot of different artists, but which artists are focused on when they talk about them and present in a classroom, and why, and starting to understand sort of that link between the curriculum and, you know, the curriculum that exists and then the taught curriculum, and looking at that. And it really started with a self-reflection and having our teachers work looking at their own practice, but then also in teams. And then so in establishing a process for that was then that we've continued to check in on as we've gone through the year. So it really started with the teams picking a unit to think about and really to go through a variation of this checklist. And really you can see here in terms of the kinds of things we're asking them to think about, or thinking about the images, the art movements, the artworks that they're looking at, the discussions of artists. You know, what are the links that are provided to teachers? What are the assignment prompts? What are the kind of the sample activities, the student work, and those guiding questions? So that's what teachers were gathering as they started to kind of look at this review. And what I'll say is that we did this first with a team of curriculum writers, as when we first closed down and we were really doing all that rewriting for curriculum for the virtual space. That's when this work really began. And we started with a team of writers. I called them the curriculum sprint team. They were really incredible group of teachers. And what we did is we had a group of teachers, and then we had an additional ring of people that were advisors who might not have had the time or experience to necessarily be part of the writing team, but they had a voice that we needed. So we had this really kind of great collection of people. And we did this first looking at the curriculum in whole as we built resources for virtual learning. So we can go to the next slide. So again, what you're seeing here then is sort of this kind of part two, where we're working with all of our teachers in the district. And this is what they're looking at in terms of that scorecard. And we kind of reduced it down and focused this idea of representation, that what is something all art teachers were doing? They're showing artwork. How do we think about that? And how do we get past sort of superficial representation to our teachers really providing that space that is those, you know, windows, mirrors, sliding glass doors, to understand other cultures, to understand themselves, and have access to kind of really present those pieces. So we can go to the next slide. And so we were looking at the work, they were doing kind of these pieces, and then it was giving them sort of some feedback, building off of that sort of that piece of using this, you know, really as an audit to kind of say now and then what. So, okay, I'm here, because that was really the key is that everyone is somewhere. Where are we going to go next? And that was really important to this work. It was about kind of establishing your baseline and then looking at what you can do and sort of having those conversations. And the key to this work has really been about inviting those conversations with our teachers to improve the outcomes for our students and including our students in those conversations. And one of the things that we have continually heard from our teachers is just how wonderful those conversations are. It's provided a space for students to bring in artists that they're excited about, for people to kind of look at different cultural pieces that may not have been in the classroom before. And so those are the questions that we really use, the guiding questions around the departmental work. So it started with, you know, in terms of this was all happening around Professional Study Day last year, and there was sort of two parts to that day last year. They did sort of a personal assessment and then worked in their departments or small groups for our elementary teachers. Next slide. And then the next piece with that was then, all right, here's your task. So there was some resources. This is an incredible video. I highly recommend it. Titus Kapfar, he talks a lot about his experience as an artist and going through art education, or really art history training, and then never really learning about any, you know, Black artists and how that, what that meant and what it meant to go into, you know, a museum and never see yourself or to feel like you were in a small place. And so it was really a really great conversation that he has, his TED Talk. And really then thinking about, we broke into we were identifying 3 major places that seemed to be the roadblocks for our teachers. It could be blind spots or implicit bias around some of this. It could be gaps in their own education. We did a big look at sort of what was in terms of teacher training and talking with our curriculum writers and the things that they had not learned or the places they didn't look. So much of art education for our teachers, it really was centered in, a very sort of European tradition. And, it didn't really bring up some of that. So our teachers had their own sort of learning to do and new places to look. I look at my own education and I see that, and I'm like, oh, these are things I did not learn about, and so how do I build that learning so that I can be the best teacher for my students? And then also this perception that there is a lack of diversity in the field, which is not true. There's a lack of sort of canon, brought forward, but there have always been diverse artists. There has always been art. There have always been cultures making art, but which ones have we celebrated? And so that was kind of the big piece of it. And so looking at like once a group kind of identified, where is my obstacle? Here are some resources to think about and look at this a little differently. And so that was then, and what teachers were asked to do was make one commitment for the year. And we were going to check back in on that commitment. And we did. And so we can go to the next slide. I don't know if there's I think there might be one more. So yes, so what we did is we had regular PLCs last year. We had two things. We had regular PLCs for our teachers to come together and talk about what they were seeing in student work, what they were experiencing. We also had our department chairs coming together to talk specifically about what they were what changes they had made and then what they saw because of a change. Many of our teachers really were like, this is what I needed to kind of rethink what I've been doing, to shift. Nobody was on automatic last year, so we had this great opportunity to seize the moment of change. And really look a little bit differently about what we brought in. And also we were in this incredible time where art brought so many of us through the last 20 months or so in terms of the way we've engaged with it and really understand that we can connect to so much of it through virtual, it opened up the world. So we really leaned on a lot of what we were seeing to help that. And we asked one question every time we got together last year. In terms of when we were what do you know about your students that help you design this lesson? To really center it about your students. And that means that you might see some different artists in, a lesson at one school versus another. And you would say, why? And it'd be because I have students that are interested in this or come from this background, and I want to make sure that they see themselves in it. You wouldn't want to only see one kind of thing, but that idea of not having a single narrative, that idea that our students, have this asset-based knowledge. One of the pieces to share, there was a teacher, it was a 5th grade class, there was a student, they were talking about fabrics and they were talking about patterns. And this student brings up this beautiful Adinkra fabric and shares it while she's on virtual and, because it's sitting next to her at her home. And she says, this is this. And she says, and here, and she gives her, her given name. She'd always gone by a nickname and tells this incredible story about her heritage. And the teachers, I've taught this child for she's an art teacher. She's had her since kindergarten, never knew. She had been born in another country and brought this incredible rich history. And it just created this space. And the teacher said, I will never teach the way I used to. My kids are so important for their voices. So that was really the big piece. And then look for is as we've continued, and now as this has been passed off to Ryan 20, who is now the coordinator for visual arts, is really like, these are the things that we're asking and looking for as we start to, as we visit classrooms, as we are also, one of the big things we do is we really use our exhibitions as our assessment models. They really are the place we see student work. And if it's okay, Megan, I wanted to just share, I think I can do that if I can just share. So I want to just show you where you can see this too. So on the visual arts webpage, let me get back here, you'll see the exhibitions, and really this is something that is one of those powerful things from the past year is that we've started to develop these virtual exhibitions, and I don't think there will be a time we won't ever have them again. They're just really powerful. So anyway, they live on our page, and you can see different ones from over the past year. We've had some that have even included parents and things submitting artwork. So we've had a lot of different ones, but the one I wanted to point to is the one that's out right now. This is the exhibition where it's the superintendent's gallery. It features our schools from the East Zone. So it features our elementary, middle schools, and high schools. The virtual exhibition features all of the work, and then there's a selection of work hanging actually in the administrative building. So I wanted to point to a couple pieces here. So we're coming off of the first quarter. The first quarter is really focused around identity. And this is a piece that is actually from Eastern, and I didn't pick that on purpose in terms of thinking, but here's what I'm thinking here. So the reason I wanted to bring this up, this is a piece and an artist statement that really talks about the student's history and their experience, as a Korean American student, and sort of, how that helps to inform their identity. And another piece similar, this is a piece from a similar unit. And this is at Chesapeake High School. And this is a student who's using this idea as a real sort of symbol as a metaphor for her art, for her identity. And what you would have seen maybe 5 years ago, both of those would have been portraits of their faces, 3/4 view, drawing. I love those portraits. Those portraits are lovely, and there is a place for them. But there's also a range of ways that we tell our story. And I think that's what's been really important, is it's broadened our students' ability to tell their story, the way they tell their story, and the imagery they use to do so. And also the writing is so much better. The writing that they're doing about their work is just, it's so much more interesting, because it's really authentic and about themselves. And if you go through this exhibition, you'll see a lot of work that is really about this theme, and you'll see it from different, you see it at different levels. These works from Perry Hall Middle School, really different than the works I was seeing from this school maybe 5-6 years ago. Much more different kind of work that I'm seeing schools select to exhibit, a different range of students that are being selected. And so, and we really see this across many different levels. I think there was one more. I think that might be a good place. Oh, this one. This is a piece, from Golden Ring Middle School. And what we see here is this incredible story, and she's collecting to a lot of her ancestry in terms of her connection to symbols that come from her African heritage. And so we see this, and and the thing is that it's providing a space for our students to tell us about themselves, to show us about themselves, and to really celebrate and connect, and also have a conversation with their classmates about their history and be proud of that. So that's really, it's really, the proof is in the student work, in terms of the why. It kind of returns to the students. And once our teachers keep saying, once they start working this way, where they're really centering the kids first, there is no reason to do it differently, because it really is driving that interest. It keeps that going. And, we know this has been a challenging school year to start. And I'll tell you, this East Side show is probably one of the strongest shows I've seen collectively from, a whole swath of our schools. And so that's just really exciting, that when we can be in a moment of challenge and the art just sings, let's look at it. So I think that probably brings it to a close for me.
Thank you, Sherry, so much, and for sharing that artwork. And so part of what I'm hoping you heard from Sherry is twofold. One is that idea that while we tend to sometimes focus on materials like books and things like that, which are equally important, I wanted certainly this committee to understand how far-reaching this work is. Also, as Dr. McComas said, great example of disciplinary literacy, because not only is the art growing, the writing is growing, because they're actually coming from that place of center. And what I hope was underscored is achievements going up. It's actually improving. So it's not just different, it's actually getting stronger. And so we don't have to think that there's a binary between standards-based instruction and rigor and being culturally responsive. My goal is to help us see that cultural responsiveness is a means to having that rigor and that high level of achievement. And so last spring, in March of 21, NYU actually released, we were ahead of them, they actually released another version of the rubric, which they call a STEAM version. So Sherry and team had to create their own, inspired by that original one. And then I think they caught up to say this actually needs to go across. And so we do have our science teams are working on this, math, I mentioned music and dance. So we would love an opportunity to, and maybe a future opportunity to showcase just how widespread this work is, because we're really proud of it, but we're also really hopeful about the opportunity it provides for our students and for our teachers. So with that, I will turn it back to Dr. McComas to open it for any comments, questions, insight. And I want to just take a moment to thank Sherry for the beautiful presentation and just for all the work she's been leading.
Agreed. Thank you. And Sherry, could you once again tell us where on the website we can find? I was trying to look it up so I could put the link in the chat for people for easy reference, but I know you talked about the virtual exhibits.
I will put it right in the chat. And what it is it's on the Visual Arts webpage and it's under the section that says Art Gallery.
Art Gallery. Okay, that's, I was trying to find it. Okay, thank you for putting it in there just for convenience for our committee members. There we go. And so thank you, Sherry. I was truly inspired, especially hearing about the young lady who was able to share the fabrics of her culture and talk about the heritage that she's bringing. And I think it just speaks to how often we unwittingly don't open the door for our students to be that voice of influence in the learning process, because the key is that they bring to the table a great deal of assets to the learning process that are unique to them, and we need to be wise enough to leverage those assets for everyone's benefit, as opposed to pushing those things to the side. And you did a remarkable job of helping us see it and hear our students and hear our teachers in that process. So thank you. And Megan, I thought it's a fantastic exhibit of how these things layer together, right? When we talk about disciplinary literacy and what does it mean career-wise to think, speak, act, talk, create as an artist. And Sherry certainly was able to share with us what that looks like and how by using a culturally responsive lens, we're able to optimize learning for our children, as opposed to silo learning, right? And approach these things as if they are separate. The brain does not work in silos. The brain works in concert to create, and you did a beautiful job, Sherry. So I am beaming as a proud mama bear of my curriculum team, Miss Shea. I could never say enough about you and the team. So I'll open it up, Miss Pasteur and members of the committee. I know I could go on as a proud mama bear. So.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Ms. Fisher, for the work that's being done. Beautiful, and the presentation was exemplary. Thank you to the CNI folks for what you're always doing in terms of being open and exposing our young people. I have a lot I could say, and a lot I want to say, and a lot I shouldn't say, and a lot I won't say. But so I'm going to start with Dr. Hager. Any comments or questions, Dr. Hager?
Yes. Sorry, I was going to turn my camera on. I thank you so much for that presentation. I love hearing about the work that you guys are doing with respect to the curriculum. I know we've had other presentations on other topics, and we're doing similar work in the medical school setting, and I think it's just such important work. One of my questions I was going to ask had to do with whether you've shared this rubric with other places, but it sounds like NYU developed one as well. Did you guys help inform that at all, or work with them in that process?
So we actually got the original rubric from them, and I did have an opportunity. I did not work collaboratively with them, but they do have a site where they take feedback and insight. And so we did share some suggestions of how our teams then were charged with tweaking it. And I was like, gee, other teams around the country would want this opportunity. I did get one email back from a representative saying, you know, thank you for that insight. We're hearing that and we're working on something. So I think I would like to think we at least helped nudge them in that direction. And then I will say that my teams have engaged, and Sherry might be able to speak to that. We have had opportunities to share across the state. So we have been in multiple settings sharing with our colleagues in different areas, things that we're doing, and in some cases in other states too. Another benefit of the virtual world was there was a lot more opportunity. So we are definitely spreading the word, and I think that, you know, what my team really models is the vulnerability to be willing to say, you know, we don't have this right yet, but we know this is the work. We know this is what we have to do. And just hearing, like Sherry talked about, the teachers saying, you know what, I've always used these artworks because I've always used these artworks because these are the artworks that I learned when I was a student teacher. That is a chain we have to disrupt if we want to really be reflective. And so we've had opportunities across the state, and Sherry, I don't know if you want to talk about that, to share the work, because we do think, and because it's work that is ongoing. It's not something that we can just say we did that. So Sherry, I don't know if you want to add to that, but.
Yeah, is specific to visual arts, but I can also speak a little bit to CTE because I know what they have done as well. In visual arts in this situation, I did present with the state, and that helped to kind of do some shifting for sort of state leadership, but then also presented to supervisors at the national level as well, around ways to kind of take a lot of these resources, but then put them into actionable steps for your teachers. And so that was a big piece. And I know similarly, our CTE program has really, like Dr. Grubbs has really been a huge leader in these kinds of conversations in terms of program design and really looking at underrepresented students in different fields. So in both those situations, work has happened at the state level, but also at the national level. And so it is something we've had that opportunity to do.
Great. My other question was going. Yeah, I was going to say that the other thing I was going to ask was whether you were working with other districts and other states, and you already answered that. So thank you. It's really great work. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let me just chime in just real quick. I need to make a plug for Sherry and CTE, the food truck. I know many of their board members were able to join our food truck, but I share the food truck in particular as that was been part of our journey to help, as Sherry talked about, underrepresented student populations and different career pathways, right? And part of our efforts towards the food truck was to really attract more young men into the professional foods forum. And so that was, again, I just like to point out these ways that we are operationalizing our vision, our policy and our vision around being culturally responsive, and making sure that students can see themselves in career pathways, and that we are opening doors for students and not sending, you know, the traditional micro messages of, you know, these career paths are for you, or these cultures are the ones we celebrate and other cultures we don't speak of. So I just wanted to share that as one more small example of how we strive to operationalize our vision here. So thanks for the opportunity to talk about the food truck.
Great. I want to jump in just about that food truck because Sherry, when I was on the Baltimore County Commission for Arts and Sciences, you were always very supportive of the things that we tried to do, especially when we brought groups into schools. Some of your colleagues at that time were not as open, so I am happy that we are making some changes, but you were. So now that CTE is under you, you do know that that's my issue about those wonderful things happening on the West Side, because they don't happen on the West Side. So you know I'm coming at you. But I want to show, I don't know if you can see this picture well, but maybe you can.
I can see it. I can see
so I want to ask you, it was done by a student, and your best guess, where do you think the student attended school? And you can be as broad as you want in terms of Maryland, Baltimore.
I was going to say,
that's a tough question.
You can tell that it is of an African queen with all, okay. Well, I'm going to tell you the person. Go ahead, Sharon.
I was gonna say, I'm wondering, just knowing you a little bit, if it isn't from someone from the Randallstown community, an artist, or from, but I don't know that. So that would be my first guess.
The person who did this is Ukrainian. And I did a 2-year exchange, and I was at an art school, and that person, this was when I was at Sudbrook. So this is out of her history. All right, this is a Ukrainian. This isn't a Black person who just was stuck in Ukraine somehow, but it was a part of the history that she was taught and a part of her appreciation for art from somewhere else. So I get full when I see very full. So I might just break that because I really do get very full when I talk about the arts and its impact on people and what it can do to civilize us, even in our basest moment. And understanding that it's not just about seeing ourselves in the art, but it is knowing that other people look at the art and appreciate someone different from them, and embracing that and not being offended by it or saying it's something wrong with it, but appreciating that there is beauty in so many ways and coming from so many of us. And that's, so when we talk about cultural responsiveness, I even shift that to cultural responsibility, that we also appreciate art and artists who came out of a European diaspora, if you will, or an African one, or from wherever. Over the week, on Sunday, I went to a Diwali celebration. It was the most wonderful thing, because there were Muslims and Hindus and Sikhs, and it's one place where I heard everybody saying Assalamu alaikum, Sat Sri Akal, Happy Diwali, and anything else you wanted to say. And some of them didn't understand what anybody else was saying. I didn't understand, other than the Sikhs, because I learned Punjabi, what most of the people were saying. And you know what? It didn't matter. And there was so much art there, and the fabrics and the clothes, and people embracing each other's culture. So that's a part of not just responsiveness, giving it and putting it out there, but responsibility to not just say, this is this group's art, this is our art. And it does not matter. When I first went to the Ukraine, we started by just taking a tour in Moscow. And I was the only African American who was in this program. And we went down into the tubes in Moscow, the subway. And all over were murals of people out of Africa and statues. If you've been there, you know what I'm talking about. And it was wonderful. And the people who were in my group kept saying, wow, gee, look what time did to this art. And I said, do you think time changed those noses? Do you think time changed that hair? I think not. Embrace the diversity. So in all that I'm saying, because this is wonderful, but what hurts my heart is the reality. How do we make people understand as a school system? Because see, I get the beat down more than anyone else every day. Dr. McComas, sometimes you get my emails because I send them to you when I get tired of people thinking that there's something wrong with sharing cultures and embracing history and embracing just the wealth and the depth of the human spirit, and that there's something divisive about it. I was thinking as you were talking, Sherry, about Romary Bearden. Most people don't know that he was a baseball player and played semi-pro and could have been the first, well, he would have actually been the second, but no one talks about the first, professional. Had the paper in front of him, the contract, and then was told there's only one stipulation. You have to pass for white. But that motivated him because he was a scribbler, a scratcher, if you will. But it motivated him, and he went into his art out of himself. And I worry so that as you share it with the teachers, just like stamped and everything else, and I asked that question even when we presented stamped, how do you know, and I'm going to use that word fidelity, but I'm going to also use the word integrity, that everybody, because it's a part of what we do, like Dr. Hager said, she loved hearing this and seeing what we do out of this department. But how, when you ask folks to do that self-assessment, how much time do we really give them to fight it out, talk it out, love it out, so that when they start working with children, it is done with integrity, not just like, okay, this. I'm so happy to see that artwork that you showed, because it says that somewhere there are teachers who are saying to these children, explore. Right. Be who you are and what you see and what you feel. And I will respect that. So I'm gonna stop now and turn off my camera because I need to. But thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you,
Ms. Pastor, for your passion. And I don't know, Sherry and Megan, if you want to talk a little bit about how we support teachers in the sort of reflective process, because I think your point is well made, Ms. Pastor, right? You know, moving forward and really embracing diversity as an asset is about dismantling, I think, fear. Right? People fear the things they don't know. They take comfort in the things that are familiar. So I think it's about dismantling fear. It's about taking the time to reflect on what might be missing, right? And recognizing that, as Ms. Shea said, you know, we may not be perfect yet, but that we're continuing in that work. And so I'll hand it over to our team to talk about what are some of the protocols or structures or supports that you have to help us as educators, because you're right, it begins with us as reflective practitioners in order to make sure that we are seeing the assets our children bring to the classroom, just like Sherry quoted the one teacher who said, "I'll never teach the same again," right? That's profound and transformative for our children. So
I can talk a little bit about some of the pieces we've put in place since, and this is something that actually is put in place kind of across the offices that I serve now, is really the importance of professional learning communities and also modeling vulnerability. And so it's both that as you know, as a curriculum office lead, you need to model how to think through and how to bring in new voices. And so you need to really model that so that when you have a team that is maybe not as dynamic as you would like, what is another voice that needs to come to that group to have a conversation? Or are there different kinds of groupings that are needed? Like, do we need to pull together some of our veteran teachers to have some conversation about this? Is this something that's showing up? And so it's about keeping the conversation going and never providing that space where it gets just stopped, right? And then the other piece is it's got to be about the student work, because that's why we're there. And that is so one of the first recommendations we made as an office when a group was having a hard time having this conversation was have this conversation in front of student artwork. Where is the work hanging? Go have the conversation looking at the work kids are making. And then, you know, and that was something like, you know, it sometimes we get to our personal work through our professional work, right? And sometimes it's the other way around. But it was more about once you're there, what is that next step? and who's with you, and how do you keep it moving forward? And that's, you know, maybe those are some of the pieces we found to be really successful. There's, you know, 332 visual arts teachers in Baltimore County, and the community is really, they're great about having conversations with each other, and it's important that we constantly make space for that, you know, and that's just, I think that's something teachers really need, is that time to come together as professionals to talk through those challenges in order to improve student achievement, you know, and that's really with that focus.
I think too. Thank you, Sherry. So Sherry talked about PLCs, and you've heard us talk about that from an instructional rigorous aspect that's just as important in these spaces. And that's why it was so important that the first part be that reflection first. You have to reflect kind of for yourself, and then just to call attention, we sort of grouped what's getting in the way, right? If not, why not? Because I think if we have clarity as a team about what's getting in their way, then we can plan for how to support that. And so some teachers said to us, I don't know any other artists. This is what I know. This is what I was taught. This is what I know. And so Sherry's team's like, okay, well, we can take care of that. We can make sure that every time we're together, we're exposing you to all these different artists and connecting you with that. Some of them talked about their own implicit bias of what they thought good art looked like. And so then we can help underscore that. But you first have to establish a place where teachers feel that they can have a safe place to acknowledge that and to reflect on that. And that only comes with, as Sherry said, a relentless commitment to it. It's not going away. We have to do this work because our students are expecting it, and because we owe, that's our commitment. And so then how do we make sure as a team, and that's kind of my job. So we have monthly check-ins as a leadership team, actually bi-weekly, I think even now, where we check in and we share across. So what are you seeing that's working with visual arts teachers? How can the ELA team learn from that to share that? We do problems of practice related to this work. And one of the things that I want to reference that you mentioned, Ms. Pasteur, which is also so true, it's why I'm so passionate that this work has to be in curriculum, because we have to give teachers that cover. We have to help the teachers that actually want to do this work and are afraid, as Dr. McComas said, or don't know where to go. That's where we provide them the cover that they can say, well, the curriculum office made me do it, right? and that's okay in this instance, because if I'm the reason that you took that first step towards meeting your student and asking that question, then I'll take the emails and I will bear that so that I can support teachers with understanding, and then coming back to teachers to have that moment of, it worked. Look what it did. Look what it offered for students. Look at the artwork that they produced. Because then when teachers feel that, that perpetuates the next cycle. Once you have that taste of, this actually yielded a change in outcomes for my students, because teachers all have that in common. They're all here for that reason. And so once we're able to also then show, this is our why, and this is how it's actually shifting outcomes for kids, that then motivates them to want to keep going. And so it's important that we also provide that space for them to celebrate when it's having that impact and that outcome, whether it's one student and one artwork or a whole class or a whole unit, and that we share that across those disciplines as well.
Thank you. I don't know if we have any additional comments or questions. I know we're getting close to our time. We may actually end on time today.
Remember, we finish at 4.
Oh, see, this is what I'm saying. We are in good order today.
2 hours, and we're going to be early today.
Yes, ma'am.
Kristen has something he'd like to say.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Shea, Dr. McComas, Ms. Fisher, for presenting that. It was incredible. I want to start off by talking about a book that I just finished reading in English this year, The Importance of Being Earnest. And when we're talking about culturally inclusive curricula, I want to mention that this is the first time that I've ever read from an LGBTQ+ author in school. This is the first time where in my classroom we had conversations about Oscar Wilde being LGBTQ+, about his history, about what he faced in his time in the Victorian era, and how that influenced this work. And that was one of the most incredible conversations I've had in my class all throughout my 13 years in school. And the same thing happened when I was reading Frankenstein. Now, we weren't Frankenstein was not written by an LGBTQ+ writer, but it was written by Mary Shelley, the daughter of Mary Wollstonecraft. And so we were talking from that feminist lens. And we were talking about the female stories in Frankenstein. And, you know, I brought in my own perspective, and I was talking about how there's an LGBTQ+ narrative in the story as well, and bringing in that conversation there. And so these culturally relevant conversations are things that students that we're having in our classes, even when maybe some of the books aren't reflective of that, but having a book that's reflective of that, like The Importance of Being Earnest, and hearing my teachers sit up there and talk about Oscar Wilde, that was something that I wish I had all throughout my education, because I felt seen. I saw the people in my room seeing me, seeing the community that I'm a part of, and recognizing that, and it was so incredible. And the work that's being done here just reflects that. So thank you so much for that. It really does mean a lot. I also wanted to talk about the not just the visual arts, but the performing arts, because there are so many student groups we have across this county, our African student associations, our Asian student unions, that are putting on performances, recognizing the cultural diversity in our schools, that are doing traditional cultural dances, that are highlighting these. And I remember in my freshman year, when I first was exposed to this at the high school level at my school, seeing these performances and hearing the freshmen around me like making fun of the cultural diversity or bullying or harassing in different ways for that. But then in my senior year now, when I have the freshmen coming in to my school and immediately jumping in to be a part of that cultural diversity and be a part of those dances and creating their own groups for these kind of things, creating a Muslim student association that was just founded a year ago in my school, creating a Glisten club that is now having for our LGBTQ students that now has over 50+ students. You know, I'm seeing this new generation of students come forward and are demanding that culturally responsive curriculum. And so I'm excited to see how our performing arts are also including those cultural backgrounds in the future, and to learn more about that. I wanted to also say that I saw a few of my peers' artwork in what you showed today. 2 students that I've known, one from middle school and one right now in my high school. And, you know, the things that they're creating, the artwork that they're showing with this new ability to do so in their classes is so incredible. So thank you again. And lastly, I want to learn more about how all of this, we talked about arts, we've talked about ELA and math and our cultural responsiveness, but I want to also have a conversation about our health curriculum at some point and kind of see where our health curriculum is being culturally responsive and all of the amazing things that I know you all are doing with that, especially with our new half-credit health course, the new additional half-credit health course. And lastly, I've talked to Dr. McComas about this individually, but I'd like to also see more about our history courses and kind of the specialized history courses that we offer, the African American history course, our military history course, our Holocaust history course, and maybe see about some of the expanding ways that we can recognize more students. So I just wanted to say all those things because I think they're all very relevant to the culturally responsive curricula, and thank you all for this work.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. And just to really quickly put in a plug, and it can be a future, in our dance team, when we started this exercise with our dance team, it really caused them to de-center ballet. Ballet is sort of the dance version of centering one particular, Eurocentric approach to what's the best form of dance, and really de-centering that and understanding. So it's been a fascinating, and for me as an ELA person, I was like, oh, that's like my job of getting rid of all the dead white male writers, right? And the work that they're doing. But I think it has been a phenomenal opportunity for us as a team and as soon as we start doing that, then students, we are seeing change. It gives me so much hope, the progress, as we have these next generation of students who are seeing themselves across and seeing that as an asset, that we're normalizing and celebrating differences rather than trying to conflate this idea of belonging has to mean conformity to whatever that dominant narrative was. So you give me hope that you're seeing it in your end too.
Right, and let me just chime in and reiterate that, this is an effort, because Mrs. Pester, I think about your comments earlier and many of the emails that we respond to, it's not about getting rid of one dominant culture and replacing it with another dominant culture, right? It's really about finding space at the table for everyone, right? And so you know, I want to be clear that it's not about, you know, tossing one out for another. It's really about opening the space and including more, right? And recognizing that there's mutual benefit from a wide array of cultures and representation in the learning process, and that it's really not, and I think people, I learned a long time ago in another district, you know, anger is a function of fear, and we fear the things we can't control. And so we fear the things that make us think that will be displaced, or we will no longer have influence, or we will no longer have voice. And so I think in working through the process, it's about helping people come to understand that by opening it up, it's not about losing voice or being displaced. It's really about including more, right? And so that the conversation is more robust and less of a single story. So
And
I just offer that.
Saying that aloud, because that is so important to be said, that it is for growth.
Right.
It's not to dismantle. It creates even more. It
Right,
spurs
right.
mind. It does all of those wonderful things. It's about growth. And when people understand that, and you all, and really look at what we do, this is why I always answer the emails.
Yes.
I answer them. I respond to them. I enjoy it on some sick level, but I do, because it's not just about the content. It's about having that dialogue that's open, that will hopefully help people to grow. And it does make me feel good, even when I finally get someone who says, we might not always agree, but I respect what you're saying, and I appreciate your respecting what I'm saying. Now the door starts to open, and then you have the opportunity to make a difference. And that's generally when I send them to you.
Yes, ma'am.
Or someone,
Thank you.
someone else. But I thank you so much. And I think what Mr. Thomas had to say just was it. It encompassed where we want to go and why we do this. Because he's the student and he represents the students. And so who knows better than he does? It's not about us. You know, we're just sitting around feeding our brains and our egos or whatever, or our likes and dislikes, but he spoke to why we do this work. That's why it's important to have that student on the curriculum committee, because they speak truth in a different way. They do. So this was wonderful. Thank you. So anyone else? We've just sort of, I'm not sure if Ms. Mack is still with us.
Yeah, she put that she had a comment. Yes.
Yes, yeah.
First of all, I'd like to say to Mr. Thomas, I had the benefit of visiting the Oscar Wilde Memorial in Marion Square Park in Dublin, and if I can find my pictures, I'll text you one. It's a cute little park, and he's leaning back in the rocks, and it's just amazing. I'd also like to point out that I have zero visual and performing art talent, but I am incredibly moved by visual art and performing art, especially when it tells a story. And I think in the case of our students, I think it gives them not only the opportunity to tell their story, but to also highlight their uniqueness, to celebrate like who they are. I don't have the ability to do that, but if a student has that ability and then has the opportunity to explain what that artwork means to them, I think it's that student's chance to shine, and that student's chance to celebrate all that he or she is. And I think that's why I appreciate this so much, because I think all of us need a place that we can shine, that we are, that the focus is on us. Wait a minute. And and that, you know, people are interested in our perspective, whether it's a verbal perspective or a written perspective or a visual perspective, that they're interested in our perspective. And then it might prompt questions like, why did you include that flower in your painting? And then it goes from there. And I am very moved by art, and I am so happy that our students feel like they are being seen in their art and in their literature. But I think this is a really great opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Mack. Anyone else? Anything else, Dr. McComas? I do have one thing that I want, if we're finished with presentations, and sadly so. I do have something that I would like to suggest for a future meeting. If
okay, yeah, we are finished today's official agenda, so I'm open to your request for future agendas, and I think we will be back with, as Ms. Shea said, other parts of this series around culturally responsive curriculum. So
that's great.
Taking notes, Ms.
Okay,
I'm ready.
I know that this is sort of out of your ballpark, but I am very interested and in some ways just a tad bit concerned about those students who are receiving homeschooling. And I don't mean the virtual, I mean those who are still our responsibility, but they are out there and we're supposedly working with their parents. Because we're still responsible for making sure that they are getting what they need in terms of instruction and that they are going to be an integral and meaningful part of our society. And I just like to hear that conversation because I know way too many people who are working with homeschoolers and they have concerns, and I have concerns, and some of it is by law, some of it's by our decisions as a system. But because we are responsible for all of our children, responsiveness, I would like something, and we can talk a little bit more because there are some specifics that I would like to hear.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. I appreciate knowing that this is a topic of interest to bring forward.
Yes. Thank you. Mr.
Absolutely.
Thomas. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Ms. Pastor. So I mentioned in my previous comment that I would like to see some more information about our specific history courses and the health classes. So I just wanted to reiterate that. But there's also, this has been communicated through email, but I haven't said it verbally yet. I would like to also explore a company called Newsella and some of the opportunities it would have for our students to achieve or to look at global issues in different reading levels. And so I would like to see a presentation or possibly a contract brought forward to the curriculum committee about Newsella. I've heard of the amazing things it has provided for students in Anne Arundel County. And so I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Sure. So let me just clarify for you, Mr. Thomas, and certainly our team can consider looking at that as a resource, but there is a whole process that we go through to make sure that our process acquisition is fair and appropriate and within lines of 6002. So I know I'm giving you sort of bureaucratic talk, but I'm doing that really for everyone's benefit because I would not want anyone to ever think because a board member made a suggestion like you should use this resource, then we bring forward a contract. There's all kinds of processes to protect everyone involved, right? Because taxpayer dollars are limited and important to use. So I just want to share that we have processes that we have to go through to make sure that that's appropriate. That's not to say, however, that we can't ask the team to look at the resource that you're excited about. We get suggestions around resources all the time, but I just, for the sake of everyone, I just want to reiterate we have these processes to ensure that everything's done appropriately and documented. And I don't know, Ms. Shea, if you have anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, so thank you for that, Dr. McComas. We actually have looked at Nizella in a couple different arenas. So what might be helpful is a presentation on kind of where we currently use it, what we've looked at, and why we have not yet moved to the contract lens, just so you can see kind of, because as Dr. McComas said, some of the contract is also about thinking about how does this supplement or duplicate resources we already have. And so I think that might be great is for us to share, because we agree it's awesome. And it is a really, the challenge, as Dr. McComas said, is there's a lot of awesome and a very specific amount of money. And I think we could share with you kind of the reviews that we've done to date. It's both our social studies and our ELA offices have been particularly interested. And it might be helpful for you to see kind of what we use now and sort of what could potentially happen moving forward, but why maybe we haven't yet, I think would be a really great conversation to have you be a part of.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. I'm sorry. Thank you. And thank you
for health and social studies for sure.
Just walking all over the top of each. I'm so sorry. But thank you, Mr. Thomas, for your suggestions, and Dr. McComas and Ms. Shea for your responses. I appreciate that. Dr. Hager or Ms. Mack, anything that you have for the good of the order?
Well, of course, I would. Never mind. I think I'm going to bring it up as an agenda item for the full board, but thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Mack. All right. That being said, Dr. Hager, anything from you?
Did we talk about the health curriculum before, or am I thinking of a different meeting?
In a board meeting.
So we have talked about the grade 5 changes to the health education curriculum. So that's probably what you're referencing. And I think that predated Mr. Thomas joining the board. So part of this might be also referencing that. But I understood maybe we want to talk about all of it, especially with the opportunity that the new high school expansion. Is that what I understood? Yeah. So we have definitely, and I know you'd always support talking more about health education, but yeah.
Okay, yeah, no, I was trying to remember if I was getting my meetings confused. So. Thank you.
You've got it straight.
All right, thank you. With all of that having been said, again, it's been a wonderful meeting. I thank all of you who've been here today presenting and supporting CNI and Mr. Gibbs. Is that correct? Yes. Again, we were happy to have you, and feel free to join us anytime. With that being said, can I get a motion to adjourn, please? No, we'll stay here all night. Oh, okay, what?
So
thank
moved,
you, Mr. Thomas. Can I get a second, please?
Second, Mac.
Thank you, Ms. Mack. We are now going to ask Ms. Cox, will you do a roll call vote?
A roll call vote for.
Actually, Ms. Pastor, there was no items for approval today. These were all both information updates. There was nothing.
No, just so we can go. So we can go.
Oh, for closing. Sorry.
No, nothing else. No, okay. Just to go. But that's okay. All right.
Ms. Pastor?
Yes.
Dr. Hager?
Yes.
Ms. Mack?
Yes.
Mr. Thomas?
Yes.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I just felt being very formal today. So thank you very much. We are now adjourned and have a few minutes left over before we go to our equity meeting, those of us on that committee. Thank you.